Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories. It started with a text message I almost ignored. Dinner with my boss and his wife tonight. Fancy place. Wear something nice. I was standing in the kitchen, hair in a messy bun, still in the same sweatshirt I'd thrown on that morning. It had been one of those exhausting Fridays. Zoom meetings that could have been emails, errands that took twice as long, and the kind of quiet fatigue that settles into your bones. The last thing I wanted to do was make small talk with executives and their carefully composed spouses over overpriced appetizers. But Daniel didn't ask for much. And he rarely insisted on anything. So I sighed, set my coffee mug in the sink, and headed upstairs to change. I chose a simple black dress, fitted just enough to feel elegant, paired with small gold hoops and a swipe of red lipstick to fake energy I didn't feel. When Daniel saw me, he smiled in that quiet, appreciative way he always had. "You look amazing," he said. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because something in his eyes made me pause. He looked nervous. Not anxious, but distracted. Like he was preparing for something, and I wasn't on it. "Is there a reason we're having dinner with Leonard and his wife?" I asked as we got in the car. He shrugged, adjusting the collar of his blazer. "Leonard just said he wanted to connect outside of the office. No agenda." I didn't believe him, but I let it go. The restaurant was one of those rooftop places with panoramic views of the skyline, all warm wood, candlelight, and quiet jazz humming under the clink of crystal and silverware. Leonard and Cecilia were already seated when we arrived, a bottle of wine breathing between them, as if they had been waiting for this moment, for us, for longer than we realized. Leonard stood as we approached. He was taller than I remembered, with that kind of effortless confidence some men in their 60s carry, like a signature cologne. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his eyes were calm, maybe too calm. He greeted me with a handshake that lingered a second longer than it should have. Cecilia, beside him, offered a soft smile and a gentle nod, her presence more reserved, but no less deliberate. The first part of the dinner was normal. If normal meant polished anecdotes, polite laughter, and conversations that skimmed the surface of real connection. Daniel talked shop with Leonard, while Cecilia asked me about the publishing company I worked for. She seemed interested, but there was something else beneath her tone, a curiosity that felt studied. We were halfway through the second course when the tone began to shift. It was subtle, not in the words themselves, but in how they were spoken. "You know," Cecilia said, setting her fork down gently, "it's rare to meet a couple that still seems in sync." I glanced at Daniel, caught off guard. "Thank you," I replied, unsure how to respond. "We've been married almost 18 years. Leonard leaned forward slightly, wine glass in hand. "That kind of longevity is impressive," he said. "Especially these days. Most people don't make it past 5 without growing bored, or worse, indifferent." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Cecilia tilted her head. "What's your secret?" I hesitated. "I don't know if there is one. We talk. We listen. We try." Leonard smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Trying," he said. "That's underrated, isn't it?" Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. It wasn't just the compliment. It was the way their questions lingered. The way their eyes seemed to scan us, as if we were being studied, evaluated. Like this wasn't just dinner, it was a test. I reached for my wine, hoping the buzz would dull the sudden discomfort growing in my chest. But deep down, I already knew. Something about this night was going to unravel everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And myself. The night air was cooler than expected when we stepped onto the rooftop terrace for drinks after dinner. The city lights stretched endlessly behind Leonard's silhouette as he leaned against the railing, swirling the last of his wine. The soft hum of jazz continued from inside the restaurant, but out here, everything felt quieter, more intimate. Cecilia stood beside him, her arms loosely crossed, her expression unreadable but calm. Daniel and I joined them, still holding our glasses, still unsure what to make of the conversation at dinner. Leonard broke the silence first. "You ever feel like time just folds into itself?" he said, without looking at us. One year blurs into the next, the same routines, same expectations. Life becomes a track you didn't even realize you stepped onto. It was a strange thing to say. I glanced at Daniel, who only gave a slight shrug, as if to say, just go with it. Leonard turned around then, his gaze landing directly on me. You seem like someone who notices things, he said. Subtle things. Shifts in tone. Hidden meaning. I blinked, unsure how to respond. I try, I said carefully. He smiled. Most people live their lives missing everything between the lines. That's where the real story is, you know. Cecilia's eyes were on me now too, calm, composed, as if waiting for something, some sign or reaction I didn't know I was supposed to give. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of being drawn into something, not physically, but emotionally. Like I was being pulled toward the edge of something invisible. Leonard took a slow sip of his wine and continued. Do you ever think about how fragile certain definitions are? What we consider loyalty, intimacy, even love. So much of it is inherited, not chosen. I felt a chill crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the breeze. There was a pattern in his words, a deliberate pacing, like he was guiding us toward something, an idea he wasn't yet ready to say aloud. Daniel cleared his throat. You're being pretty philosophical tonight, he said with a small laugh, trying to cut through the tension. But Leonard only smiled at that. I'm just old enough to start questioning everything, he said. And just young enough to still do something about it. The silence that followed was heavier than anything anyone had said. Cecilia stepped forward, close enough now that I could see the faint shimmer of gloss on her lips. There's a kind of freedom, she said softly, in seeing what's possible when you stop clinging to the idea of what things are supposed to be. I looked at Daniel again, this time with a question in my eyes. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring out over the city, glass in hand, brows furrowed. And suddenly I knew he wasn't entirely uncomfortable with this conversation. That realization unsettled me more than anything Leonard or Cecilia had said. Leonard walked back toward the table and poured himself another splash of wine, the sound oddly loud in the stillness of the night. I know this may all sound cryptic, he said finally, but we don't get many chances in life to really see each other. Not the versions we present to the world, but the versions underneath. The curious ones. The ones that wonder what if. He looked at me then, only me, and his eyes were calm, steady, almost too honest. I see that in you, he said. I didn't respond. Couldn't. My throat tightened with the weight of 100 unspoken thoughts. Daniel finally moved, placing his hand gently on the small of my back. It was a reassuring gesture, one he'd done 1,000 times. But tonight it felt different. Lighter. Less certain. I suddenly wanted to leave. To step out of the moment, out of the night, out of whatever conversation I hadn't agreed to be part of. But Leonard spoke one last time before we left. Some invitations don't come with clear wording, he said. But you still know when one's been extended. I didn't answer. I just turned back toward the elevator doors, heart pounding, unsure if I was walking away from something or toward it. We didn't speak during the ride home. Daniel's hands were steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead, but I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. He wasn't upset. He wasn't nervous. He was thinking. That was what unsettled me most. Because I was thinking too, but not the same thoughts. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the blur of passing streetlights, their glow slipping across my reflection like soft flashes of interrogation. Over and over, Leonard's words echoed in my mind. Some invitations don't come with clear wording. It hadn't been a dinner. It had been a performance. And somehow, without agreeing to be part of the cast, I had still been handed a role. We pulled into our driveway just past 10. The porch light flickered on as we approached, and Daniel cut the engine with a deep sigh. Still, silence. Inside, everything was exactly as we had left it. The faint scent of lemon cleaner. The soft hum of the fridge. The throw blanket on the back of the couch still folded, untouched. I slipped off my shoes and headed straight for the kitchen, needing something to hold, something real. I poured myself a glass of water, the tap hissing louder than necessary in the quiet house. Daniel appeared in the doorway, jacket off now, loosened at the collar. His expression was careful. Too careful. I wasn't expecting that, he said finally. I nodded slowly. Me neither. He walked in, leaned against the counter opposite me. Do you think they were serious? I stopped mid-sip, the glass just below my lips. I lowered it. Do you? He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the tiled floor, then back up at me. I think they've done this before. That sat in the air like a stone. Heavy. Cold. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. So what? They do this often, and thought we would be there next. What? Experiment. I don't know. His voice was soft, not defensive. But they weren't exactly subtle, were they? I scoffed, incredulous. No. They weren't. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his hand along the back of his neck. I mean, I guess I get it. Not what they're doing, but the why. They're older. Wealthy. Married forever. Maybe they just want something new. They want someone new, I corrected. He flinched slightly at that, then looked at me. But that's not us. Right? I blinked. The question caught me off guard, not because it was accusatory, but because it was unsure. Like he wasn't just asking me, he was asking himself. I stared at him, studying the man I'd shared a home with for nearly 2 decades. The man who knew how I took my coffee, how I hated folding laundry, how I always cried during old black and white movies. The man I trusted. But right now, he looked unfamiliar. I don't know what they saw in us, I said carefully. But I do know that you didn't walk out of there angry. You didn't even seem surprised. He looked down again, quiet. I continued. Did it tempt you? He opened his mouth, closed it. Then finally, not in the way you're thinking. I stared. Then in what way? He met my gaze, vulnerable now. In the way that made me wonder why someone like Leonard, someone who seems to have everything, still wants more. Still needs more. And whether I've been pretending that I don't. The words hit me like a slow, cold wave. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. I looked away, swallowing the tightness in my throat. I'm not interested in that kind of more, I whispered. I know, he said almost instantly. And I'm not saying I am either. He trailed off, searching for something that wouldn't sound like betrayal. You just didn't expect it to make you question something? I finished for him. He nodded. Exactly. A long silence followed. I could feel the distance between us, not in feet, but in meaning. The kind of distance that grows in silence, in polite detachment, in letting days blur together until the only thing left is routine and habit. I need you to tell me, I said quietly. Tell me this didn't open something you'll want to explore. He looked me in the eyes. It didn't. Not really. It just made me notice how far we've drifted without realizing it. That truth hurt more than Leonard's entire performance. I looked down at the counter. My hand rested on the edge of the cool marble. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I don't want curiosity, I said. I want clarity. I want to know we're still choosing us. Daniel stepped forward, slowly, and placed his hand over mine. It was warm, familiar. But tonight, it didn't feel like enough. Then let's make sure we do, he said softly. Let's not let someone like Leonard shake us. I nodded, but something inside me remained unsettled. Because it wasn't Leonard who shook us. It was what was already waiting underneath. The next morning, the house felt unfamiliar. It wasn't messy, or loud, or broken. Everything was in its usual place. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee Daniel had brewed. The morning paper sat untouched on the breakfast table, and sunlight streamed lazily through the curtains like any other Saturday. But the silence between us was different now. Not empty, occupied. Occupied by the weight of what hadn't been said. I found him in the backyard, sitting on the edge of the deck, barefoot, staring into the garden like it held answers. He didn't turn when I opened the sliding door, but I knew he heard me. His posture straightened slightly. You're up early, I said, more to test the air than to make conversation. He nodded. Didn't sleep much. I sat next to him, knees drawn to my chest, the wooden planks cool beneath me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Do you think they planned that? I finally asked. From the beginning? That dinner? Daniel nodded once.
Yeah.
I do. The thought made my skin crawl. The idea that Leonard and Cecilia had watched us, studied us, picked us. That every compliment, every lingering glance, every word had been part of a strategy. I keep replaying it, I admitted. Her hand on mine. The way he looked at me. Like I was part of a deal they were negotiating. Like I wasn't me. Just a possibility. Daniel turned toward me slightly. You're not just a possibility, he said. Not to me. I wanted to believe him.
Part of me did.
But another part, the part still remembering the hesitation in his voice the night before, stayed quiet. I think what scares me the most, I said, is that if we hadn't gone to dinner, we wouldn't be having these conversations. And now we are, which means something wasn't okay. Even before. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his palms over his knees. I've thought about that too. And I pressed. And I don't think we're broken, he said. I think we're quiet. I think we've let the routine do the talking. But we're still here. I glanced at him. But for how long, if someone like Leonard can make us question things in one night? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked up at the sky, squinting against the light. Do you remember when we used to go out just to walk? He asked. Now it's like we need a reason. A plan. A goal. Even with each other. I nodded. I did remember. I remembered summer evenings with no destination, walking barefoot through wet grass. I remembered laughter over burnt toast, long drives with no radio, rain against the windshield, and his hand resting gently on my leg. I think, he continued slowly, that Leonard didn't put the cracks there. He just showed us where they already were. That truth, softly spoken, without blame, made my throat tighten. But here's the difference, Daniel added, looking at me now. I don't want what they're offering. I don't want freedom that comes at the cost of us. I stared down at my hands. Then we need to fix this before curiosity becomes regret. He reached out, taking my hand gently. We fix it, he said. Starting now. And maybe that should have been enough. Maybe that was what healing looked like. Not an apology, not a grand gesture, but a quiet willingness to try again. But something in me was still bruised. Not because he wanted someone else, but because for a moment he had forgotten how much he already had. Later that day, while he was upstairs, I walked past the entry table and noticed something tucked beneath the stack of mail. A black envelope.
Sleek.
Elegant. Unopened. Cecilia's name was written on the back in cursive. I didn't touch it, but the sight of it made my stomach twist. They had followed through. Or maybe they had never let go. Daniel came down a few minutes later. He saw the envelope before I could say anything. His face didn't change. No guilt. No surprise. Just quiet acknowledgement. I didn't open it, he said. Why didn't you throw it away? He looked at me for a long moment. Because I wasn't sure if we were ready to throw it away. That answer cut deeper than any betrayal. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And I realized, painfully, that choosing each other wasn't always loud or certain or beautiful. Sometimes it was messy. Sometimes it looked like doubt. Sometimes, like now, it didn't look like choosing at all. The envelope sat untouched on the entry table for 2 more days. I passed it every morning like a splinter in my vision. Black, thin, quiet. I never moved it. Neither did Daniel. But we both noticed it. Every time. We didn't say anything about it, but its presence filled the space between us like static. Sunday afternoon, I found myself sitting at the dining room table, staring out the window, barely aware of the half-read book in my lap. Outside, the wind rustled the tree branches, scattering early spring leaves across the lawn. It should have been peaceful, but all I could hear was the echo of that question still stuck in my mind. Why didn't you throw it away? I didn't want to ask again. I was afraid the answer hadn't changed. Daniel came in quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He placed one beside me and sat across the table, resting his elbows lightly on the wood. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally. The kind of tired that seeps in when you're trying to hold everything together while pretending nothing's wrong. You haven't said much, he said after a minute. I didn't look at him. I don't know what to say. You're angry. No, I said softly, shaking my head. I'm scared. He leaned back slightly, surprised. Of what? I forced myself to meet his eyes. That you didn't immediately throw it away, because part of you didn't want to. That maybe you're still wondering. His mouth opened, then closed again. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not that I want what they offered, Anna.
I swear.
It's just. It made you question things. I finished for him. He nodded slowly.
Yeah.
I looked down at the coffee. It had already started to cool. You know it's worse than the question? I asked, not knowing if I'm enough anymore. Daniel flinched. You are. You always have been. Then why are we here? My voice broke. Why is this even something we're talking about? He sighed and leaned forward, clasping his hands together. Because we've been on autopilot. For months. Maybe longer. We still love each other, but we stopped seeing each other. And when Leonard said what he said, as awful as it was, it jolted me. I studied him. Into what? He paused. Into realizing that I've been asleep in my own life. That we both have. A long silence fell between us. I hated that he was right. Because even before that dinner, something had been slipping. Not passion, not affection, but presence. We had gotten too good at being fine. Too polite. Too practiced. I didn't open the envelope, Daniel said quietly. I left it there because I needed to see if you'd bring it up again. I needed to know what you were thinking. Because I couldn't risk assuming. My throat tightened. So it was a test. Maybe, he admitted, but not for you. For us. I let out a shaky breath and stared at him for a long time. Then let's decide right now, I said. Together. He nodded. Let's do it. I stood, walked to the entry table, and picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should feel. I turned it over my hand, then looked back at Daniel. He met me halfway across the room, and for a second, we just stood there, holding it between us like a fragile memory. You ready? I asked. He nodded once. I am if you are. I opened the trash bin and dropped it in without opening it. It made a soft sound as it landed, like closure. Daniel reached for my hand. No more questions? He asked. Only one, I said, voice shaking slightly. What do we do now? He didn't hesitate. We start again. So we did. That evening, we turned off our phones. No screens. No distractions. Just the two of us on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun dip behind the trees like we used to when we first moved in. He asked me about my writing. I asked him about the dream job he once wanted and never chased. We laughed. We argued about music. We remembered each other. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something settle inside me, not the way it was before, but something better. Intentional. Not easy. Not perfect. But chosen. The house felt warmer the next morning. Not because anything had physically changed. The same morning light filtered through the curtains, the same sounds of birds chirping outside, the same familiar hum of the coffee maker sputtering in the kitchen. But something inside us was different. Subtle. Quiet. A shift, like the space between us had been slowly pulled back together, inch by inch. I woke before Daniel and lay still for a moment, listening to his breathing beside me. Steady. Familiar. It struck me how long it had been since I simply looked at him, not as my husband or my routine or my safe place, but as a person. A man who had doubts. Who had been shaken. Who had considered something, but stayed. When he stirred and blinked awake, he looked at me and smiled without hesitation. That smile, the one I'd memorized years ago, had felt distant for a while. But today, it reached his eyes. You okay? He asked, his voice husky with sleep. I nodded.
Yeah.
You? He took a beat, then nodded.
Yeah.
We didn't say anything else for a while. We didn't need to. Later, over breakfast, we shared a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. The radio played quietly in the background. Daniel poured us both coffee and added just the right amount of cream to mine, without asking, like he always did. But somehow it meant more now. It felt noticed. So, he said, sitting across from me, what does starting again look like to you? I smiled at that, not because I had the answer, but because he asked. I think it looks like remembering, I said. Not just who we were, but why we wanted to be that in the first place. He nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that too. About the beginning. We both knew what the beginning meant. Sunday drives with no plans. Falling asleep on the couch with a movie playing. The way he used to leave me scribbled notes in my books. The way I'd stand in the doorway of his office just to listen to him talk when he didn't know I was there. I don't want Leonard or Cecilia to be the thing that woke us up, I said. But I also don't want to pretend it didn't. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. They didn't change us. They just exposed something we weren't looking at. I nodded. Exactly. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into the side drawer and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, a small, folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. What's that? I asked. He unfolded it slowly and placed it between us. It was the napkin he'd written on during our honeymoon. The one he'd handed me in a quiet diner in Maine. It had one sentence on it, written in his old, messy print. Let's never forget to look at each other like this. I stared at it, the ink faded now, but still legible. You kept it, I whispered. He nodded. All these years. Emotions surged in my chest, sharp, beautiful, real. I didn't expect the tears, but they came anyway. He reached across the table and took my hand. I don't want to forget again. Me neither. We sat in silence for a long time after that, holding hands across the table, the morning sun warming the room. That night, we walked together. No phones. No destination. Just us, moving through our neighborhood like we used to when life was newer and simpler. We passed the park, the bookstore, the cafe where he'd proposed. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. Something had been broken open inside both of us. Not in a way that destroyed, but in a way that made space for truth, for awareness, for choice. Love, we learned, isn't about being untouched by temptation. It's about what you do when it shows up. About what you return to when doubt has finished whispering. We had returned.
To each other.
And that, in all its fragile, ordinary, beautiful form, was more than enough.